Welcome to Courageous Conversations with Dr. Christina. This is Moving Forward Monday, a space for honest dialogue, real life, and healing conversations that help us move forward with intention. This podcast is audio only by design, so you can listen without distraction and receive what you need at your own pace. Let's get into today's courageous conversation. Before we begin, I want to create a safe listening space. This podcast discusses real-life experiences related to trauma, healing, and growth. Nothing shared here is meant to re-traumatize or overwhelm you. You are always in control of how you listen. You can pause, skip, or step away at any time. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy or professional support, but it is a space for honesty, reflection, and courage. If at any point something feels heavy, please take care of yourself in whatever way you need. You are not weak for needing support, and you are not alone.
Good morning, good people. I just wanted to say thank you for showing up for yourself today. So go ahead and grab your coffee, your tea, your water, whatever you need, because today we're stepping into a conversation that is real, layered, and honest. But first, I want to say this to each and every one of you that has been following these episodes. Thank you. Thank you for showing up for yourself. Thank you for allowing me to walk with you through this process. And I had to check the temperature first, but I believe that the temperature is right. So I just wanted to say this from the beginning as we dive into grief and what it is not always what people think it is. A lot of people hear the word grief and immediately think tears. They think sadness. They think quiet mourning. They think crying in the dark. They think visible pain. But can we tell the truth today? Grief is not always tears. Sometimes grief is anger. Sometimes grief is guilt. Grief can even be confusion. And sometimes grief is silence. Because grief is carrying emotions you were never even given permission to express. Have you ever felt something after a loss and thought, why do I feel like this? Have you ever judged yourself because your grief didn't look soft? Did your grief ever come out sharp? Did it ever come out guarded? Did it ever come out in ways you didn't even recognize at the time? That's what we're talking about today. Especially when the loss was sudden, when the loss was violent, when the loss happened early. Because let's be honest, when loss comes into your life in a traumatic way, it doesn't just break your heart. It disrupts your whole internal world. And a lot of us were never taught how to name that disruption. So, before we go deeper, I want you to take a breath. I don't want you to force it. I don't want it to be dramatic. I just want it to be real. Because this episode may feel heavy, and that's okay. We are not here to perform pain. We are not here to dramatize emotion. We are here to name what is true. And can I tell you something? Naming it does not make it worse. Naming it makes it clearer. And sometimes clarity is the very thing that starts the healing. So let's talk about what people expect grief to look like. When someone dies, especially a parent, people expect sadness. They expect tears. They expect visible mourning. They expect a certain kind of brokenness that they know how to recognize. But you know what people don't always make room for? And that is anger. You're angry because it happened. You're angry because it was unfair. You're angry because there was no warning. And most importantly, you're angry at the person responsible and at the system. You're angry even at the people who didn't protect you. You're angry at everybody whose life kept moving like yours had not just been turned upside down. And yes, here's a big one. Sometimes we can even be angry at God. And here's another one. And I don't know if it's just me, but I was angry at the person who died. Yes, I know that may make some people uncomfortable, but let's be real in this space. Loss can create emotions that do not feel neat, spiritual, polished, or easy to say out loud. Because when someone you love is taken, especially in a traumatic way, it doesn't just create sadness, it creates disruption. And disruption can feel infuriating. Have you ever been angry and didn't even realize it was grief? Have you ever called yourself moody, difficult, distant, or hard to deal with when really you were carrying unprocessed pain? That's real. That's real. We can feel moody, difficult, distant, and some people will say she is so hard to deal with. But all it was unprocessed pain. I know we talked about this in the last few episodes, but I need to let you all know when I lost my mother at 13. And yes, my mother was murdered. There were emotions I did not know how to handle. Yes, there was sadness. Of course, I lost my mother, but there was also anger. I was angry that it happened. I was angry because it could not be undone. I was angry that other people still had their mothers. I was angry that life kept going. And I was angry that the world did not stop, even though something in me had. And as a young girl, I did not feel like I had the room to express all of that because sadness. People understand that. Grief, people can often make room for that, but anger makes people uncomfortable. So instead of saying, this is not fair, instead of saying, I hate that this happened, instead of saying, I don't know what to do with what I'm feeling, I internalized it. And let me tell you something. Internalizing anger does not disappear. It just changes forms. I don't know if you heard me, but internalized anger does not disappear. It just changes forms. Sometimes it becomes irritability. It becomes emotional distance. It becomes a need to control everything. It becomes professionalism. It becomes productivity. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stayed busy because slowing down meant you might actually feel what was underneath? Have you ever overachieved, overperformed, or overfunctioned and never connected that back to grief? Because sometimes anger doesn't look explosive. It doesn't always look explosive. Sometimes anger looks efficient. Anger can also look like being the strong one. Anger can look like having no room for error because everything in you is trying to restore order after chaos. Can we talk about when grief gets misread? This is the part I really want us to sit with. If nobody teaches you that anger can be part of grief, you may grow up thinking something is wrong with you. You may think, why am I so short tempered? Why do I shut down? Why do I get irritated so fast? This one right here was me. Why do I struggle to trust people? Why do I need things a certain way? Why do I feel so triggered when life feels unstable? And sometimes the answer is not that you are too much. The answer is that part of you is still reaching or reacting to disruption that happened a long time ago. And it matters. I am so glad we're talking about this because once you understand that, you stop judging yourself that same way. Now, look, let's talk about guilt. Let's go a little bit deeper because anger is not the only layer. There is also guilt, and grief guilt can be so quiet, so subtle, so private, so irrational, and yet so heavy. You may feel guilt for surviving. That was me. Ooh, you may even feel guilt for laughing again. You may feel guilt for having a good day. You may feel guilt for moving forward. You may feel even guilty for not thinking about them every single day. You may feel guilt for what you said to them before the last day. You may even feel guilt for what you did not say. You know, guilt does not even make sense logically. Sometimes it just attaches itself to pain. At 13, I did not have language for survivor's guilt. I didn't even have words for that. But there were moments where continuing to grow up felt strange, as if life continuing was somehow a betrayal, as if forward movement meant I was leaving her behind. And living fully meant I was being disloyal to what I had lost. I don't know about you, but I felt like when I lost my mother, I felt like I should have been there. Had I just stayed home that day, she would have still been alive. And guilt robbed me of our memories because I sat there in that guilt for so very long. That ain't rational thinking. And I just needed to pause before I said that. That's not rational thinking. That's not rational behavior. But what I need you to understand is that grief does not always operate rationally. Grief is emotional, grief is layered, grief is complex. Grief is often trying to make meaning out of something that made no sense. Have you ever felt bad for healing? I did. Have you ever felt guilty for smiling again? I did. Have you ever felt like joy and grief were in conflict? I did. And what people don't understand is that happens more than what people talk about. Let me make this plain. As a child, grief may have looked like suppressed anger because you do not want to be labeled disrespectful or difficult. You do not question adults. You swallow your frustration. You stay quiet because everybody around you already seems overwhelmed. You do not want to become another burden in the house. So you just keep your complicated emotions to yourself. And then, guess what? We grow up. Now here we are as an adult, and some of those same patterns are still there. Now you're struggling to express anger in healthy ways. You either overreact or underreact. You feel guilty setting boundaries. You feel responsible for everybody else's emotions. You apologize for feelings that are actually valid. I don't know about you, but I did. You feel the need to keep things together all the time. You got to show up perfect because you got to handle it, right? And maybe, just maybe, some of that did not start with you personally. Maybe some of it started in grief. That is a real question that you need to sit with. How much of what I call just how I am is actually connected to what I survived? Y'all know, come on. We done said this time and time again. That's just how I am. That's just who I am. Take it or leave it. That's just me. But sometimes, majority of the time, it's actually connected to what you survived. Here's something I really want you to hold on to. Anger is not the opposite of love. Let's be clear. Anger is not the opposite of love. Anger is not the opposite of love. I needed to say that one more time. Because anger is the byproduct of disrupted love. Did you hear me? A lot of times, anger is the byproduct of disrupted love. When something mattered deeply, when someone mattered deeply, when attachment was real, and then that bond is broken by death, trauma, violence, or sudden loss, your system reacts. And that reaction does not mean you are broken. No, it does not mean you are heartless. It does not mean you are wrong. It just means there was an attachment. It means there was love. It means something important was disrupted. And guilt? Guilt is often the mind trying to create control. Yes, let me say that again. Guilt is often the mind trying to create control. If I would have known, if I would have done something differently. I remember, and I just said that, I told myself, if I had just stayed home, if I would have seen the signs, if I would have said one more thing, if I would have been there, if I would have. Because guilt can create the illusion that you had more power than you actually did. Mighty God. Let me say that again. Guilt can create the illusion that you had more power than you actually did. And sometimes that illusion feels safer than facing the truth that the loss happened, that it was devastating, and that something were outside of your control. But the illusion does not create peace. Clarity does. Let me repeat that. The illusion does not create peace. Clarity does. Let's talk about the emotions people don't say out loud. Can we go a little deeper? Can we go a little deeper? Because sometimes grief carries emotions nobody wants to admit publicly. Let's talk about resentment, confusion, fear, relief. Yes, in certain complicated relationships, even relief. Let's talk about fear of future loss, fear of loving people too deeply, fear of needing someone that much ever again, the fear of attachments. This was one for me. Fear of abandonment. How about this? Fear that if you let yourself love fully, life might take it from you again. These emotions are human, but when they are never given language, they go underground. Let me say that again. These emotions that you feel are human, but when they are never given language, they go underground. And when emotions go underground, they do not die. You hear that? Just because your emotions go underground does not mean that they died. They just show up somewhere else. Mighty God. They show up in your relationships, yes. They show up in your work, yes. They show up in your body, yes and yes. They show up in your self-expectations. I need to repeat that. They show up in your self-expectations. They even show up in the way you trust or don't trust. They show up in the way you attach yourself to people or not. They even show up in the way you protect yourself. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that some of your strongest reactions are not just because the moment you're in? Let me ask you that again. Have you ever noticed that some of your strongest reactions are not just because of the moment you're in? They feel older than that, deeper than that. Like they're connected to something that has been waiting to be acknowledged. Let me repeat that one more time. They feel older than that current moment you're in. They feel deeper than that, like they're connected to something that has been waiting to be acknowledged. That is worth paying attention to. I give you permission to reflect and pay attention to that. That majority of the time, what you are feeling and what you are reacting to in the moment, isn't that it is something deeper, something older, just something that's been waiting to be acknowledged or to be set free, right? And this is where I want to help us shift, right? Because perfection and integration are not the same. Perfection may say I shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't still be angry. I shouldn't feel guilty. Girl, you should be over this by now. You should have processed this better by now. But guess what integration says? Anger was a part of my grief. Guilt showed up because I was trying to make sense of something overwhelming. Fear made sense after what I experienced. Silence was survival at the time. These emotions did not make me weak, they made me human. And that is the difference between integration and perfection. Perfection wants you to deny, but integration invites you to understand. And understanding is where compassion begins. I just had to take a woosah moment, right? But I want you to picture yourself younger for a minute. You can go as young as 13 or you can go younger. You can even go older. But still, I want you to understand that you were still too young to carry what you was carrying. Think about what it means to try to understand death at that age. Try to understand violence. Try to understand permanency. Try to understand why life changed and nobody could change it back. No one expects a child or a teenager to process that perfectly. So why do we grow up and judge ourselves for the way we survived it? Why do we become adults and start criticizing the younger version of ourselves for coping the only way they knew how, the only way we knew how? Maybe you internalized your anger because that felt safe. Maybe you carry guilt because it gave your mind something to do with the pain. Maybe you became hyper responsible because chaos taught you to stay ready. Maybe you stayed silent because there was no room to fall apart. That, to me, makes sense. It may not be what you need now, but it makes sense that it happened then. And that matters because healing is not just saying I need to do better. Sometimes healing is saying I understand why I became this way. And from that place, I can begin to loosen what no longer needs to stay. So in this moment, I want to pause right here and ask you something. What emotion did not allow yourself to feel after you lost? Was it anger? Was it guilt? Was it fear? Was it resentment? Was it confusion? Or was it relief in a situation that was already complicated? What did you decide was unacceptable to feel, and who taught you that? I just want you to sit with that for a second. No pressure, no performance, no fixing. I don't even want you to try to rush yourself to a conclusion. Just notice, just be more aware because awareness is powerful. And sometimes the first step is not solving. Sometimes the first step is finally telling the truth. Now, let me ask you this. If you gave yourself permission to acknowledge your anger without judging yourself for it, what would shift? If you stopped blaming yourself for surviving, what would soften? If you stop calling your grief too much just because it did not come out looking gentle, what will become clearer? If you stopped apologizing for emotions that were born in pain, what will healing start to feel like? I just want you to think about that. I don't want you to force an answer. I don't even want to rush a breakthrough. I just want to let the question do its work, because sometimes healing begins with permission. Permission to feel, permission to name, permission to admit that grief was never just sadness, permission to acknowledge that what was buried is still asking to be seen. So today, I want to leave you with this. You are not wrong for having complicated emotions around your loss. You are not broken because grief showed up as anger. You are not falling or failing because guilt attached itself. You are not too much because your emotions were layered. And you are not dishonoring your loved one by telling the truth about what grief has really felt like. Truth creates room for healing. And healing does not always begin with release. Sometimes it begins with recognition. So today, I want you to be gentle with yourself. I want you to be honest with yourself today. And Dr. Christina gives you permission to acknowledge what you were never given space to say. Because what is acknowledged can finally begin to heal. Thank you for joining me today. And I look forward to our next courageous conversation.
Thank you for sitting in this conversation today. If you recognized yourself in this episode, know this: loneliness and grief does not mean you were too much. It often means you were carrying something heavy without enough room to process it. As we continue this season, we're not reopening wounds. We're understanding patterns. Be gentle with yourself. Keep choosing courage and keep moving forward.